welcome to the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast, the fortnightly podcast that explores self awareness, leader effectiveness, and leadership at all levels. Join me, your host, Nia Thomas, as we talk to today's Knowing Self, Knowing Others guest. Sarah, thank you very much for joining me today on my very first podcast. It's fabulous to have you here. And I was just thinking about, I think we've met through LinkedIn. I
Yeah,
don't
we
think we've,
have actually.
yeah, and I don't think
Yeah.
we've actually ever met in person.
No, I would definitely remember that, but we are long overdue an in-person meet.
Most definitely, yeah, that 3D part is definitely missing.
Absolutely.
But it's wonderful to have you here. And for everybody else listening, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself because Sarah is a particularly interesting person to all those listeners that maybe have not come across Sarah before. Once you've heard about Sarah, you will definitely be linking yourself to her on LinkedIn and listening to her podcast. So, Sarah, please do introduce yourself.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm totally delighted and I feel very flattered to be your first guest. So, my name is Sarah Metcalfe. I am the Chief Happiness Officer and founder at my own company called Happy Coffee Consulting, and I do workplace culture and happiness consulting. So, the idea being that if you focus on the happiness of your employees, then basically every business metric you care to measure is improved. As well as making your business better, it's also the right thing to do. And then on the side, because I have so much time, I am also the co-leader of Woohoo Unlimited, and we are a group of around 130 chief happiness officers from more than 30 countries around the world, and we are really just working on promoting that as a mission to create a better world of work.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. And if anybody is interested in the Chief Happiness Officer training, please do go and check out Sarah's website, Happy Coffee Consulting, and you will find out lots of information there. It's something that I aspire to. So hopefully one day I will get onto that course.
We will get you. I
Yeah.
know we will get you.
So, Sarah, we have 5 questions that I'm going to pick
Okay.
your brains about, if I
Brilliant.
may. So, the first question: how do you define self awareness?
Ooh. Um, so I guess for me, self-awareness is obviously the simple answer, being aware of yourself. But I think um for me it is about looking at who you are as a person, who you believe you are, who you aspire to be, how you impact others, how you're coming across, and I guess really thinking about the difference between um yeah, between those two, because often who we think we are, who we're trying to portray, and then who we potentially are to other people can sometimes be different. And so for me, self-awareness is about constantly questioning, thinking again, looking at yourself from a different light, looking at yourself in a different way, trying to see yourself through someone else's eyes. And yeah, and all of those kind of different spidery webs that fill into it. I think there's probably more to it, but in a somewhat succinct way, I guess that would be how I would define it.
That's really interesting. And I'm already going off topic. Um,
Go.
Part of the positive psychology at work that
Mm,
you really understand far more than I do, that notion of feedback and giving feedback well. During my
mm,
research, I read a lot about feedback and being self-aware in how you give that feedback and also receive that feedback.
mhm,
What
mhm.
does positive psychology say about self-awareness, feedback, how you put all of those things together so that you create a learning culture within an organization?
Mhm. Such a good question, and I'm definitely not an expert, or I would never call myself an expert. Passionate, I'm very passionate about it. um, so I think in the context of feedback, self-awareness is also including awareness of others, right?
Definitely.
So some people are more sensitive than other people. I know this because I am one of those people. So having an awareness of other people's kind of personality types, their communication styles, their values, their needs. I just did a really, really interesting kind of uh, deep dive into uh, conflict and kind of the idea of people's needs and their needs being met or unmet is kind of the root of all conflict.
Mhm.
um, and so the idea that being self-aware is important. So how do you come across, how do you prefer to be told things? You know, that the platinum rule of management: don't manage others how you want to be managed, manage
Mhm.
others how they want to be
Yep.
managed. But that takes an awareness of how what your style is, you know, how, you know, what are your strengths, what are your styles. And it's not kind of any one of the, but you can choose any of them, right?
Mhm.
I think, you know, if you do personality profiling, if you do strengths finders, if you do communication styles learning, if you do Myers-Briggs, you know, whatever it is that you're doing, um, it's all a data point, right, about yourself.
Mhm.
And then what you have to do is turn that around and go, right, if I'm like this and this is how everything affects me, how, who is the other person, and what affects them, and then how does who I am affect them. And
Mhm.
that's part of the feedback for me that's really, really critical, because um you can give feedback in a way that you believe is useful and helpful, and then be really surprised that it's not taken well.
Sure.
Um,
Yep.
and there's kind of a lot to that if we went all the way into the feedback side of things, you know, in terms of, you know, positive feedback is so rarely given. It's, you know, never,
Mhm.
ever, ever have I ever heard someone say, oh, you know what, I get too much positive feedback from my boss.
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
So, yeah, so I guess in terms of self awareness, it's almost knowing who you are and then knowing who they are.
Very interesting. So I'm going to take you on to question number two. Do
Okay.
you think there is a relationship between self-awareness and leader effectiveness?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we just talked about, if you're aware of your style, so someone like myself who's potentially like a really very happy person, maybe has a higher happy set point, but
Mhm.
also one of my strengths is positivity. So I can um, be a very effective leader, but I can also cause people to think I'm not an effective leader because they think I don't see the negative side of things, right? So again,
Yeah.
this awareness
Mhm.
of how I come across and what people might need to hear. Again, so this is almost becoming, I keep veering away from self-awareness and into awareness in general, I
Sure.
guess. Being really critical. Obviously, being aware of myself, that's the one thing I have impact on and I
Mhm.
can be in charge of and I can change or adapt. So understanding myself is really critical. I think also the leaders I know who have self-awareness, in my experience, have also had more ability to accept where they're wrong. You know,
Ah,
because
yeah.
if you're going into self-awareness,
Mhm.
you're automatically starting to get curious about yourself, right?
Sure.
And so as soon as you become curious about yourself, you can stop being defensive, because I think curiosity is the antidote to a lot of those kind of negative
Yeah. Yeah.
mindsets, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So being curious about yourself probably would lead you to be like, oh, well, if this is about me, then what about you?
Yeah.
Actually. And so then again, if you're effective as a leader, it means you can communicate, you can help people, you're aware of the situations, you can be wrong, therefore you can be vulnerable, you can be available, you can be empathic, all these things that potentially, if you just think you're really great at your job, you might not be as open to all of those external factors. So I think,
Very
yeah,
interesting
yeah,
ideas.
I think
Yeah,
so.
definitely. I'm going to take you straight on to question 3.
Hmm.
Do you think effective leaders can be found at all levels of organizations? So a slight different twist to the
It is a
question.
different twist, and
Mm-hmm.
I love it because it is a nuance, but I believe often they are found more at all levels of the organization,
Okay.
um, than in, not everywhere and not in every organization, but we are still in a space where, historically speaking, people have been promoted because they're really good at their core jobs, not because
Mm-hmm.
they're great leaders.
Yep.
And so, if you're searching around, then you'll probably see people who make things happen. That's probably the best description I've got in any organization. If
Interesting. Do
if
you
you
think
come
that
in,
different
mm,
industries have this is more prevalent in different industries? Do you think there are some organizations and sectors that are more red tape where it doesn't allow this to happen? Or do you think has potential in any organization?
I think it has potential in any organization. I think
Hmm.
if you find effective leaders, even in a high bureaucracy organization, you'll those are the people who get stuff done.
Hmm. Yeah.
Censor myself there. uh, if you walk into an organization, a great example, when I was in elementary school, if anyone wanted anything done, they went to the
Mhm.
secretary.
Yeah,
Anyone,
absolutely.
any parent, any
Yeah.
teacher, any child,
Hmm.
everyone knew where to go.
Yeah.
Um, and so you'll have these kind of hubs
Hmm.
of knowledge, and they may not be getting things done through traditional leadership lenses. Um,
Absolutely.
but I would call those people leaders.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, and you do see them in all walks of life, in all sectors, and all
Absolutely.
industries. Yes,
Yeah.
and they are
Yeah.
often the people that
Absolutely.
you remember for their
Yeah.
ability to lead teams without that maybe management mandate behind them.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Have you got someone who is, um, people are following them
Yeah,
without
regardless.
that mandate, right?
Well, this takes us very neatly on to question 4.
Yeah.
So, do you think that leaders at the most strategic level of organizations have greater self awareness than leaders at other levels of organization?
Such a loaded question.
Hmm. Isn't it?
So, my observation, it has been that some of them, yes,
Hmm.
um, huge amounts of them, no, but they believe they have,
Uh-huh.
and they use the language, and they, maybe they want to, but
Okay.
again, vulnerability, because I think we're coming into a really interesting period here where you have people from the kind of, 80s and 90s and, early noughties school of management
Hmm.
who are this is the end of their career, this is the twilight of their career. And some of the people who are somewhat under them, who are learning this new style of management and leadership, and some of them just get it and they're great, and some
Yeah.
of them do not. But I would say, I guess, at the most strategic level of organizations, they should have greater self-awareness
Yeah.
than leaders
Okay.
at other levels of organizations. But and when you see someone who does it, it is like magic. It is like
Yeah.
lightning.
Yeah.
It is like, I don't know what else to call it except for it is magic.
Hmm.
Um, but I haven't seen that as like, I walk into to senior leadership and that's what I see across the board.
Yeah.
That's my
Interesting.
experience. I hope that there are many organizations out there who have those things.
Hmm.
Um, but I haven't yet seen it like, they all do.
Yeah.
Um, I do think, though, that there is a much greater understanding for the need for it. And I think that is definitely a movement that I see and hear and feel is happening.
Do you think that COVID has changed that, accelerated that movement? I think for me, in what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, what I'm
Mm,
reading, I think there is a shift towards a different style of management because we've been more interested in well-being, which means that you have to be more aware of people, how people are behaving, their emotions, etc. Are you seeing some
yeah,
particular shift
absolutely.
since COVID?
Yeah, yeah. So I would say just sitting in this way that we are, that we did
Hmm.
for such a long time,
Yep.
has definitely had an impact on people for all people, maybe not just
Mm.
leaders, but all people being more self-aware because we have had um I don't want to say time because many of us were incredibly overworked and are still overworked, and time is a
Mhm.
ridiculous concept, as I was doing 10 hours of meetings with my 3-year-old hanging off my shoulders
Yeah,
and my
yeah.
husband upstairs in bed for 9 months, that was I totally appreciate that. But space, I would say, it created space for
Mm.
us to be more self-aware. So I think that it has. And then, as you said, all of the kind of traditional ways that we have managed walking around, looking at people, seeing productivity,
Yeah.
um, all the ways that we have created happier workplaces, perks, benefits, bonuses, great office stuff, food, free fruit and coffees and all those kinds of things. Those were all gone.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so we absolutely had to roll up our sleeves as leaders and managers. And those who hadn't taken account of people's well-being and people's individual needs and requirements in the workplace came front and center. I
Mm.
think sadly, my observation is we've slipped. We haven't learned as
Mm.
well as I would have liked us to.
Yeah, I would agree.
Um, and I wish that weren't the case. I think it will happen, and I think it has definitely expedited
Yeah.
um, this type of leadership and management that you and I totally believe in and buy into, um, but not as much as I wished it had.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, and I think you're right. We sort of moved forward. It's almost like a wave. You can see the
Uh-huh.
wave moves forward, and then it
Yeah.
moves back a little bit further. But then the tide has got to come
Yeah.
in, and then yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
and I wonder whether we're just on on a really trajectory of change
Yeah.
still.
I
And I
totally. Yeah. Yeah. I think we are. I think the biggest changes are still to come.
I
That's
I
my
wonder if
that's my
we
sense.
talk in 12 months' time, what will
Yeah.
we be talking about?
Yeah, definitely.
What will
I
be the
I would
important
love
things?
to. Yeah, what are the things that have completely shifted and
Yeah.
moved? Yeah, I agree. Really interesting to see
So the
this.
final question, question number 5. Do you think effective leaders have more self-awareness than ineffective leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully our conversation has led to that. Yeah, I
Hmm.
think where I see ineffective leaders is exactly that. People who have absolutely no concept. And these are senior leaders, but also leaders in many other areas that you have leadership. They have no concept of the impact or lack of impact
Hmm.
their actions, behaviors have on those around them.
Yeah.
They are those the ineffective leaders are those people who you put your head in your hands when you had a meeting with
Yeah.
them, or everybody's cameras off because the looks of disbelief on your face as
Yeah.
those people say things. And I'm laughing at it because it's happened multiple times to me. But it's so unfortunate because I do believe that anyone can be an effective leader,
Hmm.
and self-awareness is a huge piece of that, because once you're self-aware, then you can start to be vulnerable and to share things with people and say things like, oh, I don't actually know what that means, as the leader, right, or as the head
Yeah.
of something. Whereas it feels more like ineffective leaders are now the emperor's new clothes.
Mm.
That's
Yeah.
that's how I experience them.
Yeah.
You'll
Interesting.
walk out of a room, or walk out of a meeting, and everyone looks around because they assume they're the only person who
Uh-huh.
was less than blown away, say, by the
Hmm.
tactics or whatever happened in that particular space. But um yeah, and if you were self-aware, you would start to ask other people questions, and you would start to get curious, and you would understand, what could I do differently, what could I do better,
Yeah,
um where am I getting things right, what am I great at, what am I not so great at, and oh, I really messed this one up, or I said the wrong thing, or I needed to, that's what starts this dialogue of being and bringing your whole self to work, right, being human
definitely.
and vulnerable, and saying, when things are bad, people treating people at work like adults.
Yeah. Yeah. Earlier on, you said something like people are often promoted because they are good at the technical side of their role, but
Mm,
actually those people aren't always leaders. And
absolutely.
I think that's what you're saying here, that
Mm,
actually just because you're at a senior position, if you are lacking in self-awareness, have you really got that ability to create that team, that true leadership
yeah,
style and culture within your team, your organization?
yeah, yeah. That sums it up perfectly. Really, that's it. It's if self-awareness is probably a leadership skill, and so if you don't have it, perhaps you shouldn't be a leader. Um, but it's also a challenging thing because you know self-awareness is also um we decide how self-aware we are, right? So it's it's
Sure.
if I think I'm really self-aware, who says I actually am? Well,
Yeah.
I do because it's myself, right? So there's,
Yeah.
obviously it's a that's, I guess, for me, that's where that as a leader, self-awareness is just half of that. Um, it's half of that puzzle. The other bit is awareness of others.
Yeah, most definitely.
Um,
And
yeah.
there's a study, the Dunning-Kruger study, which I absolutely love. And forgive me because I always think of Donald Trump when I think of this. If I think I'm brilliant at something, it's quite likely that I'm not brilliant at something. So yes,
Yeah,
the leaders who think they are amazing and fabulous and have their team in the palm of their hand, they're often the ones who really, really don't. So if
yeah,
anybody's interested in
exactly.
that, please look up the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's really interesting, and you will see it play out in your organizations.
Oh, absolutely. And it's the emperor's new clothes. It's,
Hmm.
those head in your hands moments. And it's so unfortunate because, like I said, I think anyone can be a great leader. Um, but you got to leave that ego at the door. And it's
Absolutely.
mostly what we don't see. We're starting to see more of it. Um, but yeah, it's not where it's I don't think we've quite hit the tipping point yet.
Yeah. The wave has still got a bit more distance
Still a
to
bit
travel.
more. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we have another few tides.
Sarah, it's been absolutely brilliant talking to you. Thank you so much for being my very first guest on the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast. Um, Maybe we will indeed come back and have another conversation in 12 months' time, and we'll put the world to rights then.
I would love to do that. Thank you so much for having me.
It's been brilliant. Sarah, thank you. Thank you for joining me, your host, Nia Thomas, at the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast. If you'd like to know more about self awareness, leader effectiveness, and leadership at all levels, please take a look at my website, knowingselfknowingothers.co.uk. You can also join me on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Make sure you bookmark the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast and tune into the next episode in 2 weeks' time. I look forward to having you on my learning journey.